Hello, everyone. My name is Nance Sparks, and I have the fortunate opportunity to moderate our Lights, Camera, Action readings. So we're going to kick it off with Karis Walsh. So if our other authors would mute and hide their video for me. Karis is an author of 15 contemporary lesbian romances, as well as 2 romantic intrigue series. Her stories are set in some of her favorite places in the Pacific Northwest and often include her passions of music, animals, and academia. She works as an office manager and horseback riding instructor and spends her free time reading, playing the viola, and taking care of her animals. So I'm very excited to hear what you have to read for us today.
Thank you. Glad to be here. I'm going to be reading from Mounting Danger, which is my first romantic intrigue series. It's the Mounted Police series. And in this part, we have Rachel, who is now in charge of a failing mounted police unit, and she needs Cal's help to train her horses and her people. And Cal said she'd help as long as Rachel could beat her in a little friendly polo match. So Rachel has everything to lose here. It's her career, it's her reputation. She's got some demons that she's battling on her own. And for Cal, it seems to be just a game and just play. So that's the setup. And here we go. Hey, cowgirl. Rachel twisted in her saddle at the sound of Callan's voice behind her. She was riding a tall, rangy bay with a white blaze and 4 white socks, lots of chrome. The gelding was as neatly turned out as Raven, with the same color scheme and tidy braids. Cal looked even better than the horses. She was wearing a royal blue polo shirt with maroon sleeves and the PNW Polo logo emblazoned in gold letters on a diagonal maroon stripe across her chest. Her breeches and tall leather boots were competition quality. Rachel, in jeans and chaps, had dressed for an informal morning practice, not a high goal tournament. Cal's nickname for her only pointed out the differences between their appearances, but Rachel tried to shake off the implied insult as she followed Cal onto the field. Cal casually tossed a small white ball in her left hand as they walked to the center of the field. I wasn't sure you'd showed up, she said. You must really want to win that kiss. You can try, Rachel said. The kiss was damn tempting, but Rachel had more important matters on her mind. Her team, her department, her city. She was fighting for a cause while Cal was simply playing a game. Rachel couldn't help but win. Just a little stick and ball play, Cal said. Nothing fancy, best of 7. Rachel nodded. Let Cal picture a leisurely canter up and down the field as they passed the ball and flirtatious comments easily between them. Meanwhile, Rachel would ride like a knight going into battle, armed with her pride and her. Cal flicked the ball onto the ground. Go, she said without preamble, as she and her horse surged forward. Cal struck the ball with her mallet and sent it sailing toward the goal line before Rachel realized the game had started without her. Shit. All images of her victorious crusade faded away as Rachel chased after Cal's bay. She spurred her horse in a late attempt at pursuit, but Cal knocked the ball between her goalposts before Rachel got close enough to challenge her. She pulled Raven to a walk as Cal trotted back to center field, her mallet tapping the ball alongside her on the ground. Excellent job, cowgirl, she said. I'd love to recommend you for any of my opponent's teams. Rachel ignored that comment and tightened her grip on the reins. This time she kicked Raven into a canter before Cal finished saying go and swung her mallet as she approached the ball. Instead of trying to beat her to the shot, Cal crowded onto Rachel's path and pulled her mount's shoulders to the left so they bumped into Rachel's horse. The collision blocked Rachel's mallet between the 2 animals and nearly knocked her out of the saddle. She was forced to brace her rein hand on the horse's neck while she scrambled to regain her balance after the aggressive hit. Her horse's stride faltered and Cal took advantage of it and turned the ball toward her own goal. Cal whacked the ball between the uprights and brought it back to center. I'll give you a head start this time, she said as she scooped the ball with her mallet and lobbed it in Rachel's direction from several yards away. Rachel wanted to refuse any pity shots, but she decided to get at least 1 goal before she got too choosy. She spun her horse around and ran after the ball, connecting with her mallet 2 times as she carried the ball up the field. She heard Cal's horse close behind her, but she only had 1 easy shot to make before she scored. She held Raven steady with her left hand on the reins as she leaned to the right and sliced through the air with her mallet. She anticipated the satisfying crack of contact with the ball, but at the last second, Cal's mallet hooked hers with a sharp tug and spoiled her shot. Rachel's shoulder wrenched back at the impact and she loosened her grip on the mallet so Cal didn't pull her right off the horse. Cal twisted her own stick to disentangle it from Rachel's as she cantered by, and Rachel had to take a few precious seconds to rewrap the mallet strap around her wrist. By that time, Cal had yet again taken the ball down the field to score. Rachel jogged back to center, rolling her shoulder to relax the muscles after the jarring blow. Without jeopardizing their mount's safety, Cal had pushed the legal limits of both her ride-off and the hook. Any umpire would have given her at least a warning by now. Cal's suggestion that they get together for a casual one-on-one session hadn't hinted at this kind of rough play. Stick and ball my ass, she said if they met midfield. It'd be my pleasure, Cal said with a wicked grin. Maybe after I make this match point. Go. Rachel didn't have time to wonder whether Cal was flirting with her or wanted to throw her off balance mentally as well as physically. She sent her horse into a gallop only a moment behind Cal. Rachel had expected Cal to play a clean game of polo, but so far she seemed as intent on unseating Rachel as scoring goals. She decided she could either complain or fight back. So rather than try for a shot at the ball, Rachel played defensively and used her horse's weight to shove Cal to one side. Cal tried to turn back in the opposite direction, but Rachel pivoted a hoofbeat more quickly and again forced Cal away from the ball. After that, play deteriorated into a series of skirmishes as the two women swarmed around and over the ball, making less contact with it than with each other. Rachel's earlier timidity disappeared, and she wanted to cheer when her elbow connected with Cal's ribcage hard enough to make her grunt. The move would have drawn a foul in regulation play, but this match had its own rules, or lack of them. Cal had Rachel beat in physical strength and experience, since she'd probably been playing polo every day since she learned to walk, but Rachel used her horse's speed and agility to counteract Cal's advantage. The evenly matched battles continued as they wove up and down the field. The intense play stopped briefly when Rachel brought her horse to a halt after a fierce collision that left Cal draped across her side, one hand on the cantle of the saddle, where it barely brushed against Rachel's ass. In such close contact, Rachel could smell the muskiness of their combined sweat and see the challenge in Cal's eyes. Rachel had come here to battle Cal and overcome her reluctance to help, but now she had a new opponent, her own libido. Her attraction to Cal was distracting in a normal situation, but here on the field it grew in direct proportion to the aggressiveness of their play. She had come with such high ideals, prepared to win for her city and community, but now all she wanted to do was pull Cal even tighter against her and fuck her right here in the middle of the open polo field.
All righty, that's a way to start us off.
Thanks.
Fantastic. Quick question for you.
Yeah.
Are there any special preparations or groundwork that you do when considering and writing an action scene?
I try to picture, I'm pretty visual when I read and when I write, so I try to picture kind of the scenes and the moments from it. And I know, like with this one, I'd kind of take it in little chunks where it's one round up the field and kind of see what they're doing in my mind and then write it and then picture the next part. So I have to visualize it first. That helps
Well,
me
you
write
made a
it.
great visual for all of your readers. That was fantastic.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right. Well, next we have Jessie Thoma, who has shunned the idea of finding a favorite genre to write and instead has published everything from superheroes to contemporary romance with a few women in uniform thrown in for good measure. Jessie lives in New England with her family. Welcome, Jessie.
Thank you.
So what are you going to read for us today?
So today I'm reading from Hero Complex, which is available now, and this is the superhero one that was mentioned in the intro. So this scene that I'm going to read from, one of the main characters, Bronte, she's the one who's gained superpowers, and she had her research stolen from her by the villain named Bard Verstrand. And so she is now on a mission to get it back. And she and 3 other individuals, including Athena, who's her love interest, have been kind of hiding out in a warehouse, hoping not to get caught by Bard and her cronies. So she's now taking a pretty big risk to sneak back in. She's sort of testing out her powers for the first time. So we'll see how that goes. Bronte opened the door a crack. The others were sleeping, and she took one last look at Athena curled up on her bed before she closed the door behind her. She was the only one who needed to put herself in danger. She would keep the others safe. She set off at a run toward Bard Verstrand's building. She covered the roughly 5 miles in 15 minutes. An unexpected wave of emotions hit when she was confronted with the building she'd spent years in, perfecting her Zeptobots, expecting to produce something good for the world. Now here she was, ready to break in and try to steal it all back to prevent Bard from unleashing it. She took a deep breath and shook out her arms. You guys ready? She looked at her hands. She didn't get a response, not that she was expecting one. Bronte moved among the shadows to the building and let herself in. Her time would be limited. She could fight her way out if she needed to. She had to. There was a lot depending on her success. She thought of Athena and the possibility of never seeing her again. She shook her head to banish those thoughts. Now was not the time for distractions. Bronte checked doors until she found an empty office with a computer. She searched files quickly, counting silently in her head. She figured at best she had a couple minutes before she was discovered. It was difficult to control the mouse because her hands were shaking so wildly. Her heart was thundering so loudly in her ears she was convinced someone was banging on the door multiple times. As soon as the files transferred to her hard drive, she peeked out the door. 3 of Bard's men were running toward her. She threw the door open, hitting the closest one in the face, and ran in the opposite direction. She turned a corner and 2 more men awaited. Bronte lowered her shoulder and barreled through them. Her breathing was ragged. Her heart seemed to have begun beating everywhere in her body. The men tried to grab her, but her metallic skin was slippery. She burst free and kept running. She tried to remember where the exits were. Her brain was fuzzy. Her eyesight focused down to only what was in front of her. She banged off a wall as she took a corner too quickly. She skidded around another corner, only to face 2 more of Bard's men. She changed direction and took a quick right down another hall. Somehow, she made it to the lobby. Before she made it to the door and freedom, she was stopped by a familiar voice. Bronte Scales, nice to see you again. It was Bard. Bronte turned slowly. A shiver ran along her spine. You shouldn't have come back here, Bard said. A ferocious blow landed across Bronte's shoulders from behind. It knocked her off balance and she fell to her knees. The external hard drive flew from her hands and skittered across the floor. Bard stopped it with her foot. Now that I have this as well as you failed completely. Bard smashed the hard drive with her expensive-looking snakeskin shoe. Plastic shards scattered. Bronte didn't have time to think before blows hit her shoulders and her legs. This time she didn't go down. She turned to face her attackers. 2 more of Bard's men. They each had long sticks and were swinging them expertly. A strike clanged off Bronte's ear, bringing her back to her knees. Once she was off her feet, the 2 men moved in and rained down a torrent of attacks. Although her metallic skin protected her, Bronte wasn't able to get back to her feet or fend off the blows. She tried unsuccessfully to swat them away and mount a counterattack. It was painfully obvious how inept she was at hand-to-hand combat. What had she been thinking? She fell with her face against the cool floor after a particularly brutal series of strikes. Then, as suddenly as it all had begun, the assault stopped. Bronte gingerly returned to her feet and faced Bard. She took up what she hoped was a fighting pose. I don't know if I admire or pity your insistence on prolonging the punishment, Bard waved something forward. I'd like you to meet the latest product of your creation. This is Septimus in a prototype suit. Septimus stepped into Bronte's line of sight. He was wearing a metal suit of armor that looked like a next-generation military tactical gear. He pulled a shield over his face that was a screen of some sort. When she looked closer, there were screens on his shoulders, chest, and knees. They looked like the screens Spiro used to manipulate emotions. Do you think you're worthy of the powers you have now? Bard sneered at her. Septimus's screens lit. Bronte was overcome with doubt. It doubled her over and left her gasping for breath. She saw her hands return to their human skin. The next attack sent searing pain through her ribs, shoulders, and back. What gives you the right to wear that metal suit? You are no one. Bard squatted in front of her and lifted her chin. You're going to get the others killed. Their deaths will be your fault. It's only a matter of time before we find them. Bard held Bronte's face toward Septimus. Bronte was powerless to stop her. The screens changed, and the guilt that swept through her was more overwhelming than the doubt. Surrender now. If you're cooperative, maybe I'll even let the hot little nurse go. Bard stood. Fury overwhelmed her manipulated emotions. Bronte scrambled to her feet. Another blow landed on her shoulder. She swallowed a cry. She couldn't seem to summon the Zeptobots. Before she made it halfway to the lobby door, she was knocked off her feet and slid across the freshly waxed floor. She refocused in time to see Septimus stalking toward her with his fist cocked. I really need to get out of here. Bronte scooted backward on her butt. Can I put you in the driver's seat? Bronte hoped the Zeptobots could hear her. No matter what you do, you will never be good enough. Bard strode toward her. You aren't going to cure cancer, and I'm going to take credit for the Zeptobots. Shame and sadness filled Bronte. She hadn't been fast enough to avoid Septimus's screens. There were too many of them. Tears streamed down her face. She wiped at them angrily as she scrambled to get away. Help me. Bronte held up her hands. Are you surrendering? Bard sounded delighted. Bronte's legs stiffened and she was forced to her feet. She felt like a playable character in a video game. I wasn't talking to you. Bronte flipped Bart off as she sprinted for the door. She didn't think she could make it back to the warehouse. The adrenaline was wearing off rapidly, and as it did, the pain intensified. Her field of vision started to go dark. Her limbs were fluttery. She slowed and took stock of her surroundings. She wasn't sure who'd been driving the high-speed sprint, but either she or the Zeptobots had brought her to the coffee shop she'd visited with Athena. Her vision faded further and her body screamed with pain. She stumbled for the coffee shop but couldn't make it to the front door. The alleyway was closer. Maybe she could rest there long enough to regain some strength. She made it as far as the dumpster and collapsed. The last thing she remembered before the world went dark was the slam of a door and someone's cry of alarm.
Wow, that was a powerful. You put her
That
through the
action.
ringer. Do you feel it's important to let your readers catch their breath for a beat after a scene like that?
It depends on what my goal is with the scene. Sometimes I want everybody, including the characters, to be sort of out of breath and off their game a little bit. And in that case, speeding up the action over a couple of chapters might be good. And then depending if I need it to hit home in a certain way, then yes, the next one might be a chapter that slows down and lets everybody catch their breath and reflect a little.
Very good. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next reader is Ileandra Young. Ileandra Young writes urban and traditional fantasy featuring strong female characters brimming with sass, ass, and humor. When not writing, Ileandra can be found baking greedily, crocheting gleefully, or playing Minecraft or Stardew Valley for far too many hours at a time. Welcome.
Hello.
What are you going to read for us today?
I'm going to read, it took me a second to decide. I'm going to read from Both Ways, which is my first piece with Bold Strokes. It's Both Ways. It's the beginning of the Spear Mission files, and it's right near the beginning of the book. So it's the least spoilery.
Wonderful. I will let you get to it, and thank you very much for being here.
Yay. All right. I'm putting up a timer so I don't do anything silly. All right, here we go. So setting the scene, Danica has been set up on a date that she did not want by her mother. Her mother set her up with a man, which was even worse. And this man tried to kiss her, which was even worse. So she punched him and left. But she's a little way away before she goes, do you know what? Maybe punching him wasn't a great idea. So she's going back to apologize. Yeah, she's going back to apologize and other stuff happens. So this is actually chapter 4. I'm half a mile away before the rage fades, before my mind clears and I can see and understand what I've done. No blood in this scene, by the way, I don't think. But she will definitely swear somewhere in here because she does that. Damn, I slam my hands against the steering wheel. It hurts, but not as much as it might receiving my P45 tomorrow morning. Cursing, I turn and speed my car back to the car park. Maybe I only stunned him? The area is quiet when I arrive, just Jack under a street lamp hugging some short, dark-haired woman. At his side, a sleek silver Jaguar stands with its door open. My stomach turns. Creep, that didn't take long. Wait. I slam my foot down, grinding through the gears as my wheels spin and screech. Closer now, Jack screams aloud and shrill, his frantic cries mingling with the snarls of the creature clawing at his throat. I stab the button, which lowers my windows, and hurl one of my shoes through the widening gap. It thunks off the head of the shorter figure, not hard, but enough to gain attention. Wild silver eyes and long fangs glistening with streamers of drool. Vampire. I turn the car, toss the other shoe and screech across the car park. Turn. The creature releases Jack and follows, legs pumping with supernatural speed. Again, I floor the accelerator, hunch low over the wheel. I hit the vampire traveling at a powerful 50 miles an hour. The impact throws me against my seatbelt, dents my bonnet, and catapults the snarling figure 20 feet across the tarmac. It rolls twice, then lies still. Jack! Out of the car and running. There's blood on his face, his hands. Are you okay? He blinks at me. She, out of nowhere, talking, then teeth. She bit. Look at me, Jack. Look at my face. Hey. At last I have his attention. I use the opportunity to assess his injuries. It's just a graze. She didn't go deep. Get in your car and lock yourself in. Vampire, they don't. I slap him. Get in the damn car. But lifeblood, they're not supposed to. For goodness sake. With his heavy arm drawn across my shoulders, I hold his body close and guide him back to the Jaguar. His steps drag, but at least he's moving. At the car, I shove him inside and slam the door. Don't move. I'm going to. A heavy impact numbs my entire right side. A moment later, I realize I'm on the ground, several feet away from Jack's car. The vampire fights to get inside the Jaguar. The glass must be reinforced, like my limo earlier, because repeated punches and kicks barely scratch it, though that won't last long. I scramble up and wave my arms. Hey, you! It pauses. Yes, you, Fang Face, over here. The next punch cracks the glass. Jack yells. Small chips of stone and grit catch between my toes, but that's still better than wearing heels. My sprint takes me back to the car and provides momentum for a flying roundhouse kick. Jarring shudders race up and down my leg. Did I break my foot? The vampire lands to the side, nursing its jaw. Jack's car roars to life, squealing away with the rear fishtailing. Moments later, rear lights wink and vanish as it peels out of the car park. Jackson Kobe, my hero. Again, the vampire stands, this time focused on me. It snarls. I yank the knife off my thigh holster. We collide hard, and the air flies out of me in a gushing whoosh. I stab at the eyes, but the vampire is fast and willow slender. She slithers out of my grip and slips behind me before I fully understand she's moved at all. I drop into a roll and spring up 3 feet away. Fluttering red fragments of red fabric litter the ground around me. Watch it, this is the only dress I own. More snarling and flexing fingers. Next charge I'm ready for, ducking beneath groping hands and slashing with the knife. Blood rains across my face and shoulders, then the weapon skitters out of my hand and across the tarmac. My hand throbs. The shoulder of my dress lists on the right, exposing half my bra. Damn you! I turn, dart back to the car. Thunk. She slams into my back and I thrust my hands out. It saves my face and nose, but both wrists creak as I twist on my belly. Kick, kick, and kick again. The grip on my left ankle slips away along with several strips of skin. Blood streams down my leg. She snarls, the silver in her eyes intensifying. Up again, run, faster, faster. I reach the car as the vampire catches me a third time, clawing for my face. Jump kick. Her head snaps back. Elbow strike. Down. I leave her writhing and pop the boot. Inside it, no spear kit, but I do have rope, a hazard triangle, a spare tire with the wheel missing, and a wheel nut wrench. My fingers scrape the latter as she drags me down. The tire tips over the side and hits us both, surprising the vampire enough to give me precious half seconds. I grab the wrench and swing it down, a two-handed grip. Crunch. The large end cracks off the back of her skull, and she slumps into stillness. Ugh, finally. Sorry, I really like that scene. That's it.
I like that scene too. That's pretty.
It still makes me laugh. It's been years, but I love it.
Oh, it's wonderful. So you set that in a car park.
Yes.
And so how was that setting important to your scene? You know,
It kind of wasn't. Like, I knew I needed to introduce this vampire character and I knew I wanted to do it quickly. And given the half cringe, half comedy of the preceding scenes, I wanted something fast and punchy and I didn't want to leave it too long for her to leave the car park. And I did want to involve Jack. So it's like, well, may as well be in the car park then, you know, rather than letting them get too far away.
wonderful. I loved it. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next reader is Nicole Stiling. Nicole lives in Massachusetts with her wife and 2 children. She joined BSB in 2019 with her debut novel, Secrets in a Small Town, and she's published a total of 4 novels. Secrets in a Small Town and Heart of the Storm were both Goldie finalists. She loves reading mystery and horror novels, playing video games, and binge watching TV. Wonderful. Welcome.
Thank you.
What are you going to read for us today?
I'm going to read from my new book, The Rewind. The scene is Alicia, who is one of our main characters. She's over her boss, Jade's house, and there's a killer on the loose. Jade is convinced that her husband is the killer, and Alicia thinks she's just being paranoid, but she finds that that may not be the case.
All right. Well, we look forward to it. Thank you.
Okay. About an hour into the movie, Alicia's eyes were closing of their own volition. She sat up straighter and tried to focus. Just before the big reunion kiss, she could feel her lids get heavier and heavier. What was that? Jade asked, sitting up. Alicia sat forward. I didn't hear anything. Must have been my imagination. Jade leaned back against the lounge, but didn't look relaxed at all. Scrape. Okay, that time I heard it, Alicia whispered. Something outside? Jade stood. I don't know. Sounded like it could have been the patio slider. Was it locked? I think so. I don't know. I might have left it open when I was formulating my brilliant plan to shoot Evan with a BB gun. Really? Great. So we're sitting ducks. Alicia strained to hear any noises coming from downstairs. All she could hear was the sweeping music coming from the television, signifying that the boy had, in fact, gotten the girl. She pointed frantically to the TV so Jade would turn it down. With the TV off, the house was completely silent. It was probably just something outside. A million things make a scraping noise on concrete. A soft patter, followed by a sharp but quick squeak. Someone, Jade whispered loudly. She grabbed the baseball bat off the floor and charged the door. Jade, no! We don't know who it is or what they have. If they see you coming at them with a baseball bat, they could shoot you. Wasn't it you who told me that the killer's MO was shooting people at an outside location where there weren't any witnesses? I told you it was Evan. He's come to finish me off. Jade had that wild-eyed look again. She raised the bat over her shoulder with both hands as if a fastball was whipping toward her. Call the police. We'll just lock the door and stay put. Stay quiet. Alicia's heart was racing and her mouth was a desert. Her face was hot and her arms were covered in goosebumps. She'd never felt this kind of fear before. Am I having a heart attack? Her chest didn't hurt, but she was sure that a heart wasn't meant to beat that violently. You call the police. I'm going to call Evan's phone to see if he was stupid enough to leave his ringer on. With shaking hands, Alicia grabbed her phone and brought up the dial pad. 912. Backspace. 912. Damn it. Backspace. 911. Yes, I need to report an intruder. I'm at 742 Deer Path Lane. Please hurry. It might be the small town slayer. Alicia's voice sounded if it were coming from someone else, a mile away. We're sending help. Are you alone in the house? No, it's me and Jade Conley, the owner of the house. Your name, please? Alicia Flynn. We have a unit on the way, Alicia. Where in the house are you? Jade pressed her ear to the door. I don't hear his phone ringing, but someone's coming. I can hear footsteps on the stairs. Alicia stifled the whimper that rose in her throat. He's coming up the stairs, she whispered onto the phone. They have to hurry. Jade whipped around and put a finger to her lips. Alicia nodded, but her heart was beating so loudly in her ears that she wasn't sure if she'd stop talking or not. All she could hear was the frantic drumming rhythm. The drumbeat was interrupted by a startling bang against the door. That time, a whimper did escape. Alicia clapped a hand over her mouth. Jade silently shushed her again. Alicia tiptoed over to where the BB gun was lying on the floor. She picked it up and rested it on her shoulder like a soldier. She figured she'd probably be better off using it as a bludgeon than as a gun. She took a deep breath. Bang! On the door again. Jade jumped and the baseball bat clanged against the wall. Evan, I'm not going to let you scare me. You want to fight? Let's fight. She threw the bat to the floor and took the gun from Alicia. She cocked it and the lever made a loud click as it dropped into place. Jade, no! Alicia yelled as Jade went for the doorknob. She startled her enough for Jade to retract her hand as if the doorknob was burning. After a beat, they heard footsteps running from the door. He probably wasn't expecting 2 of us. We can't let him get away. Jade opened the door and took off down the hall. No, Alicia wailed. She ran after Jade, nearly falling down the stairs as she took them 2 at a time. She could finally make out the sound of a siren in the distance. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Jade was screaming incoherently as she ran through the house. Glass shattered. Alicia flattened herself against a wall and prayed that she'd see the sunrise tomorrow. He's gone, Jade yelled. The slider door is wide open. He must have run out when he heard us coming. I'm going to kill that son of a bitch. A police cruiser squelched to a stop in front of Jade's house. She sprinted out to the front lawn, the gun still clutched in her hand. Alicia realized she was still holding the bat she picked up when Jade was running down the hall. She dropped it on the floor and rushed out after Jade. 2 officers were trying to get the story from Jade, who was officially in hysterics. She'd been reckless and rash, but Alicia admired her bravery. She was obviously sick of feeling like a victim and ready to take matters into her own hands. Alicia had never been so happy to see Kelsey in her life as she watched her pull up behind the police car. She craned her neck to see if Cammie was in the passenger seat. She wasn't. Alicia, what's going on? Kelsey asked as she exited. Was Evan Conley here tonight? I don't know. Jade was so afraid that someone was going to come for her, and I basically told her she was paranoid, but she clearly wasn't, Alicia said. The words just spilled out and wouldn't stop spilling. We were watching a movie and then we heard something, but I thought it was just somebody outside, but whoever it was came in the house. And then they were banging and I don't know what they wanted. To kill us? Does Evan really want Jade dead? Okay. It's possible that this is unrelated, Kelsey said. Not likely, I'll grant you, but we don't want to jump into the small town slayer nonsense feet first. I know it's all anyone can think about, but we have to be objective. Does Cammie know? Should I call her? Alicia had been wanting to call her since she was stuck inside Jade's bedroom. Not that she'd been thinking of it then. But now that the panic had subsided, everything was weird and boundaries were sort of blurred. That's it.
It's pretty intense.
Right.
So you were in Alicia's point of view for that reading. How deep into your character's point of view do you need to be for an effective action scene like that?
I think you need to be pretty deep in order to, get the feeling that you want to portray, because she's supposed to be terrified. So, everything needs to be through those terrified eyes.
Oh, it's fun to listen to all of her thoughts and
Yeah.
her insecure, everything, it's just very intense. So,
Right. Yeah. That was the plan, to make it tense.
well, it's wonderful.
Thank you.
All right. Our final reader, Miss Jane Walsh.
Hi, Nance.
Hi, how are you today?
Excellent. How are you?
I'm doing great. Jane Walsh is a Canadian author who once upon a time studied both history and costume design. Now she puts those skills to use by writing queer Regency romance novels. She lives with her wife and their cat in snowy Montreal. So welcome. What are you going to read from today for us?
Today I'm going to read from the second book in my Spinsters of Inverley series, The Accidental Bride.
Wonderful. We'll look forward to it. I'll let you set it up and we'll look forward to your reading.
So I have 3 books in the Spinsters of Inverley series. All 3 are available now. The latest one, The Secret Duchess, just came out in January. And it's a series following 4 friends in the fictional seaside town in the south coast of England called Inverley. Each book can be read pretty much as a standalone, but it is the story of these 4 friends. So the second book, The Accidental Bride, features Grace, who's a lady's companion. And the companion her companion is Lady Edith. And the other love interest is Thea, who's a botanist. And her brother, Charles, is eloping with Lady Edith. So Thea and Grace are teaming up to go on a kind of a pell-mell race all the way up the coast of England through Scotland to stop a wedding from happening, because there were different marriage laws in England and Scotland in the Regency era. So in Scotland, you could get married without too much involvement. You just had to basically say your vows in front of an audience. And in England, it was a bit different. So these 2 characters, Edith and Charles, are on the lam, and Grace and Thea are following in hot pursuit. Just let me find my place here. Okay, here we go. The innkeeper at the neighboring establishment nodded at them before they started the day's travels. Aye, the stagecoach broke an axle and was stopped here all yesterday. They couldn't get started until an hour ago. I saw the pair you're describing. They were right anxious to be on their way to Gretna Green. They were only an hour behind? They hadn't investigated the area last night, as they had arrived at their own inn late and weaving on their feet from drink. But now Thea cursed herself from ever having purchased that brandy. If not for that, they might have caught Charles and Lady Edith yesterday, while they were still in England and unable to wed. An hour is nothing, Anthony said, clapping a hand on her shoulders. We can make the time up if the horses are fresh. We can catch up with them. West Hill Grange was once more in her grasp. Nothing could stop her now. But even 1 minute could be too late, Grace said quietly, staring down at her lap. Thea wanted this, not just for her own sake, but she wanted it for Grace. She wanted to give her that relief, ease her strain. They would get to Gretna, no matter what. She was exuberant when the village of Gretna Green came into view half an hour later. The carriage wheels roared their way round and round, clattering up the sounds of victory to her ears. The horseshoes struck the cobblestones like swords clashing. She was certain they hadn't been so loud coming into any other town along the way. Lady Edith and Charles surely must hear them. Why, the whole town must hear them. Thea almost tumbled out the door before the coach had stopped in front of the smithy, the horses whinnying and snorting. She gripped Grace's arm to support her while they walked up to the door, Grace limping, but refusing to be left behind. A man came outside, wiping his hands on his leather apron. Looking for new horseshoes? He asked cheerfully. I can set you up right as rain. We're looking for a young couple who've come here to elope, Thea blurted out. My brother is tall, is blonde. Grace was just as eager for news. My charge has black hair and freckles. He laughs like a donkey. She carries a reticule with a big flower on it. The smithy laughed and held up his hand. Ladies, slow down. No need to rush your words. There hasn't been anyone in town today looking for marriage. Thea blinked. No one? They'd been told that a broken axle had stopped the stagecoach, but what if Charles and Lady Edith had abandoned it and found another way into Gretna? Folks might have a kind disposition to help a young couple eager to wed. No one came through yesterday either, he said. Grace looked ready to collapse with relief. We aren't too late. And yet, there was no sign of them. Is there perhaps another smithy? Thea asked, frowning. It's a small village, miss. I'm telling you now, Angus hasn't seen anyone either. I would know if any stagecoach passed, loud as they are when they rumble on through. But if you do see anyone looking to wed, be sure to send them over to me. He puffed out his chest. William Campbell's the name. I've better rates than Angus has, and that's a promise. They went on to another inn and thought about what the smithy had said, that no one had passed through in the past few days. Grace and Thea sat in the room together, quiet, knees almost touching. Thea bumped her shoulder against hers. Until we know for sure that we have failed, there's still hope. I'm trying to believe it, Grace said, but her voice quavered. Her hands, neatly folded in her lap, trembled. Thea tucked a strand of Grace's hair behind her ear, then stroked her cheek. No matter what happens, I'm glad for the journey. I know it's been difficult, but it's been a grand adventure. That startled a laugh from Grace. Has it been? I rather thought it's been a grand nuisance. Adventures are meant to be at least somewhat amusing. Grace's face was serious, the shadows dark under her eyes, lines of strain on her brow. And yet, it was clearly a rare moment of levity for her. There was humor in her eyes and in the press of her lips as she struggled to suppress a smile. Though all might be lost, Thea felt as if she were truly getting to know her. Perhaps traveling so far north up to Scotland had tipped her life upside down, because the trip seemed worth it for just this one moment of fellowship with Grace. Then she heard the unmistakable clattering of an approaching carriage, and her heart leapt into her throat. Grace gasped. Could it be? They leapt to their feet in unison and scrambled down the stairs, Grace hopping on one leg, their bonnets and gloves still strewn across the bed. Outside, Charles stood by the large stagecoach, helping Lady Edith down. They locked eyes. Then Charles whooped and ran. Grace's heart pounded as she watched Edie scamper off with Mr. Martin. They're going to the smithy, Thea cried, jolting Grace out of her shock. Quick, we must follow them. Grace's ankle hurt too much to put much pressure on it, but she hopped as best she could, while Thea helped her across the cobblestones to the smithy. Mr. Martin could have outpaced them all, but thankfully Edie was of a delicate constitution. It wasn't all that much faster than Grace. They reached the smithy at the same time. Edie clutched Mr. Martin's arm as Mr. Campbell came out. Please, sir, would you do us the honor of wedding us? He nodded at Thea and Grace. This the pair you were looking for, eh? Grace nodded. Yes, we do not agree with their marriage. His face softened as he looked at Edie, tears brimming in her eyes. The wee lass looks in a mighty rush to be wedded. She cannot, Grace said. Edie, come with me now. Your mother won't approve. But I love him, sir, she said, staring up at the smithy with wide eyes that could melt iron better than his forge. And I love her. Mr. Martin put a hand on Edie's shoulder and drew her close. Helen blazes, Charles, be reasonable, Thea snapped. Call this off and we can all escape scandal. I have every intention of making this an honorable union, cried Mr. Martin. After so many nights on the road together, it shall cause a far greater scandal if we don't wed, you know. He looked indignant that Thea would even suggest such a thing. Mr. Campbell stroked his beard. You love one another, he asked Edie. Of course, she said. There's no real objection here? None, she declared. They want me to wed another, but I cannot. Not when I love my Charlie. This is preposterous, Grace exclaimed. Her mother is expecting her to marry this man's brother. That's a cliffhanger for you. You'll have to find out if they get married or not.
Wonderful. And you said you didn't have an action scene to read.
This is the most action this book sees. Like, it really bisects the book between kind of the first half. This is like in the middle of the book. So the first half is the characters getting to know each other, and the second half is basically reacting to what happened in Gretna. So like a lot of the meat of the action is in this like midpoint scene.
Oh, that's wonderful. Was that scene meant to change your characters in any way?
Absolutely. My books are very character driven. Like, that's something that's very important to me, is to really focus on the characters. And I feel that action scenes, it's a lot like sex scenes. Like, I feel like any kind of action that the character takes, like, it is kind of deepening their understanding of one another. And the things that you choose to have them do, like, really reflect who they are as people, and gives them things to admire about one another and learn about one another. And definitely, like, what happens in this scene, they have to react to what's happening with the people that they're trying to prevent to marry, and that definitely like has an impact on how they feel about each other.
Wonderful. Yeah, I would agree. Fantastic. Well, if I can have all the authors turn on their video and their sound. And audience, if you have any questions for the authors, please throw it in the Q&A or in the chat scrolls. In the meantime, I noticed that every single one of your scenes, well, wait for Ileandra, but every one of your scenes embraced all the senses. So was that something that you did on purpose as you crafted the scene, was to really incorporate all of the sight, sound, touch, smell, feel senses? And why don't you tell us about that? And we'll start with Nicole.
Yes, definitely. I just wanted to make sure that it was fully immersed with sounds and the atmosphere.
It certainly was. How about you, Jesse? Do you use all the senses when you're writing an action scene?
I think it's important to, as Nicole said, really get deep into a point of view when you really want that one character's perspective to hit the audience pretty hard. So yeah, I think using as many of the senses as you can is important to that.
Perfect. Wonderful. And Ileandra, what we were talking about was using the senses. So as you're writing your action scene, especially with the vampire and in the car park, was it important to bring in all the senses, touch, smell, feel into your scene?
Perhaps more than I did, and I wish I'd given it a bit more, because Danica's running around without her shoes on. You know, she took her
Right.
shoes off because she hates wearing heels, and there's the visceral kind of monster from the depths of night coming for you. So you get the chill down your spine, you get the nastiness of teeth if you happen to get bit. You can hear the horrible breathing and the fear from Jack as he leaves her behind, you know. So I kind of wish I'd given it a bit more than I did, just to amp it up. But I didn't give it quite that much, actually.
I think you did an excellent job. Karis?
Yeah, I think that's important. And when you're kind of picturing the scene before you write it, just thinking of the elements that are there, like the horses and the saddles and the smells and just all of the feelings that come with that and the sensations that come with that. And I think when you're like we talked about visualizing it before, you kind of see the different objects and setting, and those will come in if you can use those to kind of, like we're saying, to immerse the readers in the scene.
Exactly. Perfect. Jane, any thoughts to add?
I agree with what they're saying. Like, I think adding those elements, it gives a lot of texture to the scene, and it really kind of makes like kind of a well-rounded scene that, like Karis said, like you really feel immersed in it, like you're really there. But I didn't consciously think about it. And I agree with Ileandra. Like, I think I would have liked to have put maybe a little more thought in there, because there are certain things that I think I could have added to make it even more vibrant, like in a way. Like, I'm happy with what I did. I think the scene stands, but I agree that I would have liked to have thought about it a bit more, I think.
Interesting. Is it, I've even found that with my own work, is that, you know, get all done with it and it's published and it's in the reader's hands and you're like, oh, I could have done, you know.
Mhm.
So
The editing brain never turns off.
no,
you
it
know?
does not. It never,
Never,
ever
ever.
turns off. So, any challenges that any of you found when writing an action scene that is able to really leave your reader on the edge of their seat? You know, any stumbling blocks that you've come across or anything like that? Jesse, do you want to?
I think from a sort of technical standpoint, if you have, like in my scene where there's a lot of hitting, just finding words to describe that don't just repeat on, you know, an endless loop. Because as a reader, that annoys me when I'm like, oh, you've used, you know, hitting now 25 times in 2 paragraphs. And so I think technically that is a bit of a challenge, is making it interesting and fun to read. But in terms of kind of leaving the reader on the edge of their seat, I think it goes back to what I said earlier about making sure that I know what the purpose of that scene is and how I want sort of to have the reader thinking about it, have my characters thinking about it. So depending on what the scene is, I may let them off the hook a little bit more, or really ramp it up and just fly right through the end of the chapter or the scene at full action. So it kind of depends a little bit on the purpose of that scene.
Very good. Very good. Nicole, do you have any stumbling blocks that you find when you're looking at how to write an action scene that really leaves your reader on the edge of their seat?
Oh, I definitely agree with Jesse that it's a challenge to come up with different ways of saying kind of the same thing when, you know, you're in a running scene or you know, a fight scene without using the same words over and over again. The only other challenge is for me is when you know, I have this amazing action scene in my head, and then I get it on the paper and I'm like, oh, it doesn't feel as, you know, doesn't have as much punch as it did when I was thinking of it. So then you have to try to, you know, enhance
Spice
it
it
a
up.
little bit. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Ileandra?
For me, it's finding a balance between giving a reader too much tonal whiplash and not enough, because there's little tiny threads of humor through almost everything I write, but I also have really nasty, gross, visceral blood spurting, this, that, and the other. And if I go too hard, it's quite jarring. And if I go just the right amount, it fits. And not letting my, I guess, flowery writer brain take me off on a journey that I can't get myself back from to keep telling the story. That's the hardest part for me. Not going
Okay.
too hard, too far, too fast.
Karis, you're not in your head. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think that with me, one of my challenges, like Jesse was saying, is more of a technical one where I change my writing style a little bit. I try to shorten my sentences a little bit more and use a more active voice and not as passive. And that's something in my regular writing when I'm doing a little more character, it's a little slower. I think that doesn't really work well for the action scenes, and I do have to try to adjust that a little bit.
Got it. And how about you, Jane?
I was going to say the exact same thing as Karis, actually, like that the actual prose can change,
Mhm.
shortening and tightening up sentences, and maybe having like fewer dialogue tags. Like you really have to make conscious choices in how you're structuring that scene to make the pacing faster. And it's a really interesting challenge, like compared to that to like a more intimate, in-depth character exploration of the scene after, where they're exploring, oh, how did I feel about what just happened? You know, those are two very different kind of scenes, and it really comes down to like the technical prose.
Wonderful. Well, I'd like to thank you all for your readings today, and all of your books are over in the chat for everyone to order on Bold Strokes Books, and it's really truly been a pleasure to be on the panel with you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you so much, Nance.